Hello, wine drinkers. This is Sean Corbett,
Hey guys, it's Laura Milnes here.
and this is the Crushable Spring 2020 Canadian Wine Update. Laura, it's been about the weirdest spring, not just for wine drinking, but pretty much in general. Huh?
Yep, weird times.
I was thinking instead of focusing on the virus and the pandemic, which everyone's talking about, and people are probably a little burned out in hearing, we could just kind of get right into the wine talk.
Sure,
Okay,
let's
cool.
do it.
So at the end of February, you put on another Sensory Symposium that was in Vancouver, and I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. Maybe tell the people a little bit about the overarching concept of the symposium and what your guys' goals are, and then some takeaways from the one that just recently happened.
Sure. Yeah. So the inaugural symposium happened in the Okanagan in April of 2019 in partnership with Okanagan College. My two partners, Darcy Esau and Corinne Lawrence, they're both researchers. So Corinne actually has like a food science quality assessment style of consulting company, and Darcy also has his own consulting company, which is more entrenched in data collection, specifically for the wine industry. And I had come across Darson at the Somme 3 premiere, and Corinne, I believe Darson suggested I sit down with her because at the time I was looking for partners. I really wanted to start a panel of some kind. There had been a lot of conversations on Facebook with mostly winemakers where there would be some lively debate about, a wide array of topics. And they were the first two people, well, no, actually not the first two people, the first two people that I really clicked with and were really game to take something of this size on as a team. So yeah, we just gathered 9 winemakers and talked about a whole host of different topics. And it was so well received that people started to ask us, when's the next one? We had a number of consumers approach us and ask if we could do more of like an entry level one, because the first one was quite technical and high level, which I really like because majority of the room on that day was trade, mostly like sommeliers, tasting room managers, winemakers, etc. So then we got the idea to host kind of like more of a salon format, because we had observed that the conversation was so interactive, so lively. A lot of the conversation actually came from the audience just by virtue of it being such a high level, industry kind of base. So we thought, why not take it to Vancouver and have a really intimate kind of space? And so that's what we did. And then we decided to take it even further. Why don't we focus only on local wine? Because everybody's talking all the time about, oh yeah, I support local, I go to my local farmers market, but it doesn't seem to sort of apply across the board when it comes to wine. There's no such thing as like wine to table, like this whole farm to table movement. So we decided to only pour wines from Vancouver Island, because that's really all about that like 100-kilometer radius. And when we kind of dug a little bit deeper, we realized that not all the people that we invited to be a part of the panel, of which we had 2, were actually big BC supporters. There was some debate surrounding whether people are too focused or obsessed, or if they're like, BC brainwashed is a term that I've used in the past. So it was really interesting, but I mean, the vast majority of people there were, staunch local supporters. And what was really great for me was having the opportunity to try all these wines, which absolutely blew me away. I couldn't believe it, because leading up to it, I was a little bit uncertain, because these are wines that you don't really see a lot. And specifically these wineries that I had chosen, some producers, they're less than like 1,000 cases per year. So really, really hard to come by and access for the average person, especially where I am in Ontario. But I don't know, it was just fantastic. And the support was overwhelming, especially since I planned the entire thing from Toronto. And many of the people that I invited to be a part of the symposium I'd never even met before. So it was a really great exercise of networking and fostering relationships further, bringing the community together, and also just selfishly research for myself for Crushable to find more people to feature. So all in all, it was really, really well received, and we're very happy. And we were supposed to be ramping up for our next one in the Okanagan in May, and we were going to have another stacked panel of people, very, very science-based this time, because they, in the Okanagan at the college, they have a sensory lab, so we were going to take advantage of that. And then we'd also been approached by food and beverage Manitoba, they wanted us to host a symposium in Winnipeg and then also one in Toronto as well. So we were really getting good steam and momentum. And then we were advised by BC BTAC, which is one of our sponsors in the Okanagan, to postpone it. Obviously, that was, inevitable. So that was a sad day. But now I just have time to brainstorm more and, I don't know, come up with more ideas for future symposiums to come, whenever that might be. Maybe it'll be in 2021, but we'll see. I'm remaining optimistic.
So I know it's hard to do tastings, obviously, or sensory type stuff specifically, but couldn't you still maybe do virtual lectures or virtual panel discussions and things like that? Is that something you've considered?
I haven't, honestly. I probably have a little bit of a different opinion with respect to all of these, virtual meetings and seminars and live streams that people are doing. I don't find them particularly captivating, and maybe if push comes to shove, we will have to do that. But I've never been one to kind of, follow what everybody else is doing. So I don't know. We'll see if I have to. If this goes on for 6 to 12 months, then yeah, obviously we'll be creative. But at this point in time, no.
Got it. And I remember when you were actually finishing the symposium, I got a text from you about how excited you were about some of the Vancouver Island wineries. So just hoping you could maybe talk about a few to our audience. And then, I mean, I haven't drank any, so you could maybe talk about the winemaking style, what you were expecting versus what you got, maybe what are some of the varietals that are out there?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting. I went in with fairly low expectations, despite having pretty seriously vetted a lot of the wineries that I had approached. So what ended up happening actually was a few wineries had come recommended to me. Sea Star is a fairly commonly known winery amongst sommeliers, specifically in Vancouver and BC. So I had approached them, but we actually had to change the date. So that sort of impeded some of the people who were able to participate. But from there, I was connected to a whole host of other people in the community. And that's the really cool thing that I encountered. They really support one another. So way back, Jay Drysdale from Bella actually had posted something online. I think it was like early 2019, maybe late 2018, about a winery called Rathjan. And I had always been really curious about it. And when Jay Drysdale recommends a winery, you kind of pay attention. So I had reached out to him. Yeah, I think through social media, or maybe someone had connected us. I can't really remember how it all came about now, but I emailed him, and unfortunately, just because they are such a small operation, they weren't able to participate. But he then ended up individually connecting me to almost all the people that ended up participating in the symposium. So Daniel Draggart from Kudatash, Chris Turek from Unsworth, Mike from Emmendair. And it was just so lovely because even though he wasn't able to participate, he took a lot of time out of his day to connect me to these people. And so that was really impressive to me, number one. And then everyone that I interacted with was just so gracious and flattered to have been selected. Mind you, I was really, really selective and careful about who I wanted to participate. Of course, it needs to be small, preferably low, minimal intervention. More natural, the better. And that's the great part about the island, which I learned. It's sort of this haven for making natural wine, just due to the terroir and the very temperate, sort of almost marine-like climate. They don't really have to rely on much of anything in the vineyard. pH is naturally very low, which means like really bracing acidity. So they're very reliant on sort of natural processes that want to happen in the winery that in often cases are stopped because there's sort of fear or insecurity or doubt of the wines taking a certain trajectory. Whereas on the island, they're reliant on like malolactic fermentation, for example. Without malo, their wines would just be undrinkable because the acid would just be so searing. But there's a process in malolactic fermentation where sometimes some of the malic acid can be converted into diacetyl, which sort of, is that butteriness,
Yeah.
which is very common in hotter climates like California, whereas on Vancouver Island, that doesn't happen at all because it's too cool of a climate. So they actually are reliant on malolactic, not only to tone down those acids, but it imparts really beautiful texture. It's also really great for stability and the longevity of the wine. So there's all these really great processes naturally that they utilize that I thought was phenomenal. And even going so far, like from Averill Creek, Brent Rowland, he's a former winemaker from Pearl Morissette. He doesn't use any sulfur. So these are just things that I'm really excited about, and they're doing it, and their wines are presenting really beautifully. So,
Is there a through line with the Vancouver Island wines that you drank where you get a real, very specific sense of place, or are they all quite different?
No, yeah, I would say the acidity is really piercing. There's just this sort of linearity, this fluidity. There's a finesse and kind of elegance and restraint, as opposed to, I mean, I compare everything to the Okanagan, of course, so that's my kind of go-to, where the Okanagan is like rich, round, big, more kind of stylistically approachable. So the island, I would say, is more like a wine drinker's haven, but I feel like with the people that are there and doing the things that they're doing, they're going to be recognized globally in only a matter of time. So
very cool. So moving on from that, what recent epiphanies about wine have you undergone, whether it's winemaking or wine drinking or just thoughts in general about it?
I mean, it happens all the time, and the cool part about being in self-isolation is just the ability to connect with people. So
That's a bit of an irony, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been more social than ever. I'm a highly social person, so I'm actually FaceTiming with people a lot. So like I got to taste the Jus Red from Averill Creek that they sent to me with Brent. I was just texting him, and then I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a risk and FaceTime him, and he happily picked up, and we ended up chatting for quite a long time, and he sort of like walked me through his process. And then actually the other night too, I had the opportunity to FaceTime with Jamie Good, and I've been a longtime fan of his because he's written so many amazing books. He wrote a book just on wine flaws called Flawless, or The Science of Wine, which he told me he's actually updating right now while he's in quarantine. And I guess it's not really anything to do with wine. It's more about the people that the further that I get to know these people and build these relationships, we're all just kind of like faking it till we make it. We're all perpetually learning. And a lot of these guys that normally I would have had on pedestals, I'm like, okay, they're just figuring it out as they go, just like I am. And there's a lot of ego in this industry, but once you can kind of sort of unveil that and see behind the scenes, I'm really enjoying getting to know people and kind of like seeing their humanness. And I think that's something that I said to you in one of our late night Facebook conversations, which is making it all the more fascinating and intriguing and captivating and compelling for me more than ever. So, because you can talk about wine until you're blue in the face, but it's the storytelling, and it's the tragedy or the romance or the inspiration or the travel. There's all these different like raison d'etres for people, and that's what I find really, really cool. So
I think so many wine drinkers, once you get over the initial hump of like tasting oak for the first time and liking it, and then starting to get into wine, they latch on to the stories. And yeah, you could say, oh, well, that's a lot of it is marketing. And yeah, it's smart marketing, because for sure, wine is very social, and we like to be social, and we like a good story. And that actually brings me into my next question that I had for you that I'll give a little preamble to. I was going to ask you just to go a little bit contrarian or negative for a second, tell me what stuff from the industry you're sick of hearing, and just to tee you up so you have a chance to think about it. On that point of telling stories, what I've been really disappointed in, and I say disappointed because I have a lot of friends here in the Okanagan industry, and I expect a lot from them because I think they're really great at what they do. And so I'm always expecting, maybe my expectations are always higher maybe than are realistic with time and energy and so on. And I found it really interesting that lately, with all this free time on their hands, they're more concerned about offering free shipping or discounts than they are about telling more stories. And I thought, I don't care about free shipping. I'm going to buy your wine. I'm going to buy your wine anyway. I love your wine. go out and use this time now to tell more stories. Tell me more about yourself. Tell me about your thoughts on the current vintage. Show me your process. So there's a very strange kind of, I don't know if it's a mental block or just people will avoid doing it, or maybe some people just don't believe in their product enough and they literally think they just have to play the discount game and that's the only way they can win. But that's my personal pet peeve. Do you have any things that you're just sick of hearing right now to do with the industry?
Well, you and I actually had this conversation. So leading up to the symposium, and I wanted to make sure I was prepared, but I also wanted it to be off the cuff. And so I sort of picked your brain because you're kind of like one of my go-to people. I really like your process. You think about things exactly the opposite that I do. So if anything, I wanted just an alternate perspective just for sort of some nice little controversial points to add to anything that I was going to be mentioning. And we talked about this whole support local thing. And it is a bit of a like kind of a modern trope that's a little bit trite. Like it's just, you shouldn't just support local just because it's, you know, your next door neighbor. And I talked with Ryan Corrigan about this too. He's like, you shouldn't be drinking Ontario wine just because it's local. You should be drinking it because it's good. And that's something that I would say kind of annoys me. And I find a lot of people on social media, they're partnering with, you know, maybe not even necessarily bigger brands, but they're just like, oh, drink local. And they're pushing wines that are at best mediocre. And it really, really annoys me. And Brent Rowland said this to me too. He's like, we need people like you to promote and support the pariahs, because that's how they're viewed. He said that he's had so many writers come through his cellar and they tell the same old story where like, oh, he's the black sheep, and like all these guys that are maybe doing something a little bit differently. And it even goes so far as like tastings that I go to, I'm overhearing people say like, oh, I'm so glad none of these natural people are here. It's like those attitudes need to get the fuck out of here. Like everybody's making wine and they're welcome to make it in any style that they so choose. And I find a lot of the times when I go to more conventional tastings, it's just a sea of wines that all taste the same. Nobody is confident enough to stand out on their own. And I get a lot of shit for this. Like, oh, you only drink natural wine. Like, no, I don't only drink natural wine. I want to drink wine that's interesting. Don't spew your fucking tech sheet to me. Like, there's nothing more boring than that. So I just feel like we're kind of stuck in this phase where, specifically like Canadian wine, we don't know what we want to be. Like, yeah, we're still in our infancy, and what happens with that is that we're mimicking other regions, but like now's the time to figure out what we're good at. So fucking do that and be confident in it and be humble and like employ humility and say like, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is my first time working with this variety. But Tyler Harleton said it best. He's like, who are we to say that a hybrid in Minnesota might be one of the most profound wines you try in 100 years from now? You know what I mean? So I guess I would say it's the dogma, it's the snobbery, it's just, I don't know. I don't get it. It's like, how is this still a thing? You know what I mean? Why wouldn't we celebrate every different rainbow of wine in the book? And that includes approach, style, viticulture, philosophy, like you name it. I just have no patience for people who are condescending or like looking down their nose. It absolutely drives me crazy.
Well, the beauty for us is we can all pick a niche. So we're going to support one type of wine. And if you dig it, you can listen to us and we'll do, as right by you as we can. And if you like something else, you find someone else to listen to and they'll find some wine for you too. That's why I think the buy local is just laziness, because you could say, well, it's super trite, like you said too, but you could say buy local, free shipping, or instead of talking about buy local, you could talk about your specific process, your specific terroir, which is the same thing kind of as saying buy local. It's just more interesting, right?
Yeah,
so if you say, right, if I buy from a winery 2 towns down, as opposed to the winery that's closest to me, does that make me a monster? Because the winery closest to me is more local, but it's terrible. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, I'm not obligated just because you're my neighbor to patronize you with my business. And if you feel that way, I'll give you my email at the end of this audio, and you can send me some checks. But yeah, they could go again into more detail about what their process is, and in a way, if they're talking specifically about their terroir, if they're talking specifically about where their vineyards are located, that is a story about being local, and people will respond to that. It's not begging instead, which is nice.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Just be confident in what you're bringing to the table.
so going on from there, this is just kind of a fun trivia question for me. What's been in your glass most often in 2020? It could be a producer, it could be a varietal, it could be a style, whatever you want to talk about.
Oh, in 2020. Honestly, mostly Canadian wine and a lot of Ontario since I moved here and I was venturing out that way, trying to build relationships with people and find more wineries to feature. And then once we did the symposium in February, I've just been like laser focused on the island, getting my hands on as many samples as possible, and just being really impressed with what I'm coming across. As far as like internationally, um, yeah, I haven't really been buying a lot of international stuff. Just I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mostly drink Canadian wine, and I sometimes I'm a little bit sheepish and sort of like embarrassed about that, especially when I'm talking to my uber like natty wine friends, and they've always got some splashy bottle. Like every now and then I'll splurge for something, but I think I'm pretty lucky in the sense that the things that I drink also I can monetize. So I try to be pretty focused on that. How about you?
I'm looking back through Cellar Tracker and I'm seeing the stuff that I've had more than 4 bottles of, like a particular SKU already this year. So I can see that there's a through line there. I'm drinking a lot of Crushable. There's Domaine de Ballard from Saint Amour is really good. I've had a whole bunch of those this year. We have like we fell in love with table wine when we lived in Tuscany, so that's kind of our weekly drinker. It's Pupilli Morellino di Scansano. We've had that a lot. And then you know me, I'm going to be buzz sawing through cases of Synchromesh stuff coming up here because they just delivered a couple of cases of wine to my house. So tell me, like, do you have a Canadian SKU that you've drank over and over and over again already this year? You talk
Hmm.
about rosewood a lot, right?
Yeah, but even then, like I've been there several times. Like I actually just went, I think it was early March, right before all of this kind of went down, and barrel tasted through everything with Ryan, and that was awesome. But honestly, like I really don't drink multiples of the same wine. I'm always on this perpetual quest to challenge my palate and taste it as much as I possibly can. And having the opportunity to get to do that with winemakers is such a privilege. Yeah, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it. I think it's just curiosity, and if sometimes, yeah, like if I do especially really like something, like there was an importing agency that did like a pop-up bottle shop back in the fall here, called The Living Vine,
Mm-hmm.
and I went with a girlfriend of mine, and we split a couple cases. We got a case of like the Klaus Preisinger Puzza Libre, which was just like total glue, crushable like red blend. And actually, now things are starting to come to mind because my brain is foggy today. I ate an edible last night and it kind of did me in, so I apologize. But I finally got to try something from Strekov. And if you are like a big natural fan, which you probably are if you subscribe to Crushable, you've likely seen that label like literally all over Instagram. It's just one of those, for whatever reason, just sort of like hits all those marks. But I think ultimately the reason why people talk about him specifically, and he's a winemaker in Slovakia, the wine is just bonkers. So we were at this little tiny wine bar. They have a few around Toronto, but they always do half price wine nights. My partner and I are cheap, so we headed on down on like a Tuesday night, and they had like the most killer list, and everything was like 50% off. We got a bottle of Kopich, and then I saw that they had the Strekov and they had Rosewood, and like among many other really really great producers. And so they had a 2015 Pinot Noir from Strekov, and like I'm still thinking about it, and that was like a month ago. It was like, I think I told you about it, didn't I?
I think so. Yeah. These are so
Yeah.
you're getting this stuff from direct from restaurants. Is how you're buying this stuff.
Yes and no. If I wanted to buy a case, I'm sure I could approach the agent, but I would
Okay.
not be surprised that that would be very hard to come by. There's probably a very small allocation of that. because I have friends who are importers, like in Alberta, like the juice imports guys. They bring his stuff into Calgary, and they've never even tried that Pinot before. I reached out to them. I was like, "Have you guys had this?" And they were like, "No." So I think it's pretty special.
It's awesome. Well, we'll try to look out for it. So as we kind of wrap up here, are there any shout outs you want to give to some folks in the industry, that have just positively impacted you in the last few months?
Yeah, actually, I want to give a shout out to the community in Vancouver. It was really challenging. Like we hit a lot of roadblocks trying to plan the symposium and find a venue, find wineries who are willing to participate. It also happened by accident that the symposium was happening concurrently with the Vancouver International Wine Festival. So that sort of, was a little bit of a challenge, like competing with their audience. There was a point in time leading up to it. I think it was about a month out where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off. Like I remember sitting on my couch being like, how am I going to do this? Like I was freaked out. And then I just put my head down and just fucking gave her. And we sold it out in a day. And just like the energy in that room was just, I don't know, like it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Everyone was so unbelievably positive and warm and welcoming. And the vast majority of these people I'd never even met. And by the end of the night, we're hugging and laughing like old friends. And to go even further, so a friend of mine who I had met a whole host of times, and a person that I really respect in the industry is Laura Starr. So she's a wine writer, sommelier, and then she also sits on the board for the BC Hospitality Foundation. And she had opened her doors to her home and allowed me to have kind of like a wrap-up party a few nights later after the symposium. And so we had a whole bunch of people come by, like Richard Kanazawa showed up randomly. Like it was just one of those like super random nights of like, the Amovino girls like Jessica Luongo, Tess Patterson. She has a wine club based in Vancouver, and they feature a lot of like local winemakers. Gail Mackey, Boom Boom Beverages. So she represents Tall Tale and Sebastian Ott. Just all these like phenomenal people, and we came together and we just had this like hilarious night. And I don't know, it was sort of like a pinch me moment, because even though I didn't really have very close, intimate, pre-existing relationships with these people, they just opened the doors and welcomed me in just in such a loving way that I haven't really encountered that yet, I will say, in Ontario. I don't want to, generalize too much. I think maybe I just haven't been here long enough. But I mean, having said that, I've never lived in Vancouver, so I don't know if it's that I'm from BC or what, but there's a different vibe in BC. So yeah, shout out to all those ladies, that the Vin Van girls, Steph and Joe. I feel bad. I'm forgetting a lot of people, but yeah, just all those amazing ladies, and Mark. We just had such a good time, and they're so supportive, and like we're already planning another trip. Like we're gonna go when all this blows over, check out all the wineries on the island and just reunite and continue the party.
I hope you'll take some video when you go to the island so we can share that with everybody too.
Absolutely.
There we go. She said it, everybody on, there's a recording of this. We can hold her to it now.
Yeah.
So at the end of all this, basically a lot of these producers we're talking about, like you said, Laura, pretty small. Some people are under 1,000 cases, that kind of thing. This is the sort of wine you kind of want to check out if you want to get special offers on the best boutique low intervention wine in Canada, and you haven't already signed up for our email list. You should go over to crushable.club and fill in the form. It's free to join. There's no minimum purchase. You basically check your inbox and we'll send you monthly offers for a wine pack that Laura sussed out from across the country. So again, one more time, if you haven't joined, crushable.club. Laura, is there anything else you want to add before we kind of end this?
Yeah, just thinking of everybody and hope that you have some good wine to keep you company. Stay
safe. A lot of the Canadian producers are pretty aggressively shipping right now. So you can go out and order a half case, go order a case, and hunker down at home. Thanks a lot, Laura.
Cheers.